Madam Deputy Speaker, delighted to be here making some remarks at the close of this, what has been a very good debate, and I do want to commend genuinely all the speakers for their contributions today, not least those who very much focused on the science, on the evidence, on the facts. In an issue as important as this, we must have evidence-based policy, and I simply say to the Honourable Gentleman for Sherwood, who just made some remarks about us discussing the issue of animal husbandry, cattle movements and so on, I would say to him, look to DEFRA's own pronouncements on that, which make the same points. So can I turn to some of the remarks that have been made, because it has been a very good debate. My honourable friend Pt4 and Neston raised the issue of Chapter 4.5 of the original ISG report, modelling and spatial patterns of transmission, and remarked that this work is still really to be done several years on, and we really do need to get on to that. And I would say that to the Secretary of State, who describes himself on his own website as an expert on bovine TB. Let's follow the science on this. I think we should agree on that. One thing we do need to do is do that modelling. My honourable friend for Bristol East talked about the opposition from farmers and the public and others within the West Country, and the pioneering work of her Wildlife Trust. My honourable friend for Llanelli talked about in Wales the approach there, and the remark from the ISG original trials that the cull cannot meaningfully contribute to eradication of TB. Praised the Labour Welsh Government approach on vaccination, rightly so, in TB-intensive vaccination areas, with 472 landowners taking part. My honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, talked eloquently on the impact on her farmers of testing and cattle slaughter and the meetings that she has had with farmers, but strongly advocated a different way forward than a cull. And she talked as well of the practical difficulties of shooting badgers at night. I will give way very briefly.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, the member from Sherwood called me ignorant twice for using the expression shotguns for shooting badgers. I'd like to draw his attention to the DEFRA document from May this year, controlled shooting of badgers in the field under licence to prevent TB. Point 3, the firearms that are authorised are rifles and shotguns on page 2.
Order. It's a point of clarification, not an intervention. The Honourable Lady made it in the wrong place. Hugh Aranka-Davis.
The Deputy Speaker, and it is important to stick to the facts and what is within the documents. Honourable friend for Derby North said the government had come to this decision with a sense of predetermination that the cull is the answer, and made clear that the scientific consensus is firmly against the cull as part of a BTB eradication programme. And he made clear that this could indeed be bad for farmers if this makes BTB spread worse. My honourable friend for North Tyneside put forward a coherent alternative strategy with great knowledge and insight, as did my honourable friend for Scunthorpe, who noted areas of commonality across the front benches, but we are divided on the issue of a cull. The honourable member Thurston Moulton, with her expertise as chair of the EFRA Select Committee, was rational, cool-headed contribution. I thank her for that and for the report brought forward, which we'll look at in detail in the next few days. Honourable members for North Herefordshire, the Cotswolds and others spoke passionately on the behalf of farmers, as did the members for Tiverton and Honiton, Carmarthen and West Pembrokeshire, South East Cornwall, Shrewsbury and Atcham, Brecon and Radnor, Morecambe and Linsdale, Central Devon, and the member for Sherwood, as did the honourable member for Strangford in speaking for the Ulster Farmers Union. And just an aside, we note that the various farming unions around the UK are possibly the only unions not routinely denigrated by this government. Honourable member for Brighton Pavilion described the government as intransigent on this and advocated alternative approach. Honourable Gentleman for St Ives talked with great knowledge and detail of a different approach that he hopes to pursue in his area, and said the balance of best informed scientific opinion indicates the government is running a high risk with this cull. And he made the point that you cannot do a direct analogy, not only with possums and deer, but also even with Ireland as well. And he talked about the wider effect on the rural economy and his work with Professor Rosie Woodruff on badger vaccinations. And the honourable member for Chatham and Aylesford, I think again, spoke bravely and with very independent mind, and showed again that this isn't actually a party issue, it is across benches there are differences of opinions here. This should be a science-led issue, and she laid out why a cull is wrong-headed and why indeed it could make things worse. So what we have from this government is not evidence-based policy, we would argue, but policy-based evidence. Leading scientists have observed the government has decided on the policy, then sought to cherry-pick the evidence to back it up. Bad science is worse than no science at all. So I will try and confine my words to the science and the evidence, strip out the politics and the polemics, see where the science lead us. Our argument argument, as my honourable friend the member for Wakefield has said, is that this is bad for farmers, bad for badgers and bad for the taxpayer. A cull could actually worsen TB in badger and cattle populations. Field trials showed that whilst a structured cull could reduce the increase, I repeat, reduce the increase, take the top off the rise in BTB by 16% after 9 years, in the short term it could spread the disease further afield as badgers move from the shoot-in. Hard boundaries or not, there is a risk that the disease will spread through culling, a risk that is heightened by this untried and untested approach of licensed shoot-in. A cull could cost more than an alternative, such as badger vaccination, not least because of the policing costs, the costs which the government were reluctant to reveal, yet were completely foreseeable. Dr. Rosie Woodruff's analysis takes the government's own cost estimates of badger vaccination at £2,250 per square kilometre per year, compared to the proposed culling costs at £1,000 per square kilometre per year, but adds to this the policing costs for the cull, which are £1,429 per square kilometre per year. Vaccination becomes the cheaper option. This analysis, by the way, does not include the additional costs incurred by culling as a result of performing expensive surveys and monitoring both post and pre. The government have tried to promote this as a cheap solution. We're finding out again that cheap solutions often turn out to be very expensive indeed. It's the old adage, you buy cheap, you pay twice. Badger vaccination could be an effective alternative to the cull. We do need to do more work on vaccination, we acknowledge that. But we already know from tests that vaccination reduces transmission of M. bovis to other badgers, and combined with badger mortality of typically 3 to 5 years, there is good reason to expect the impacts on reducing transmission to cattle to be comparable to culling. Moreover, because vaccination doesn't lead to perturbation, and because vaccination is shown to reduce the proportion of infected badgers rather than increasing it, as culling does and is proven to do, it should have greater long-term prospects for TB eradication. And because vaccination doesn't prompt protest, doesn't incur policing costs, it is cheaper to implement than culling. So wasn't it a great and capital error for the government to cancel 5 of the 6 vaccination trials instead of using them to test alternative ways forward? We should be fast-tracking development of oral vaccines now. It's bad decision, ministers, it's bad science. We do need to improve BTB testing, improve farm biosecurity and strengthen cattle movement restrictions. The government is considering strengthening cattle movements and biosecurity further, a recognition, I hope, that there is indeed much more to be done, and I hope the member for Sherwood will note that the government is saying this themselves. Professor John Bourne, the vet who led the 10-year £50 million trial of badger culling under controlled conditions and with current first-hand knowledge of the existing regime, has stated that, and I quote, "The cattle controls in operation at the moment are totally ineffective, and that the inaccuracy of BTB tests means that herds tested negative are actually harbouring the disease." The ministers will know this. He states, and I quote, "It's an absolute nonsense that farmers can move cattle willy-nilly after only 2 tests," and he asks, why won't politicians implement proper cattle controls? In short, truly robust risk-based cattle control movement in the UK is not in place, it's an imperative. Professor Bourne's data analysis on the deep and lasting infection in cattle herds is comprehensive and utterly compelling, and it's utterly stark. So what do the wider informed scientific community say about the cull? Eminent zoologist at Oxford University, president-elect of the British Science Association, and it's fair to say expert on this subject, Lord Krebs, has criticised the government for misleading use of science in support of the cull. He's described the cull by shooting as a crazy idea. 30 of Britain's finest animal disease scientists wrote in opposition to this cull, describing it as mindless. Former government chief advisor Lord Robert May said it is very clear that the government policy does not make sense. Well, at least last October the government was able to turn to its own chief scientist for support. So Professor Sir John Bedington said, and I urge members to listen very carefully, "I continue to engage with DEFRA on the evidence base concerning the development of bovine TB policy. I am content that the evidence base, including uncertainties and evidence gaps, has been communicated effectively to ministers." Yes, Minister, gaps and uncertainties, continue to engage, communicate to ministers. It's hardly a ring endorsement. So, as my honourable friend has said already, DEFRA ministers are pressing ahead with a cull based on unproven shooting of badgers, despite leading scientists warning against this untested and risky approach. A cull would be bad for badgers, bad for farmers and bad for taxpayers. We've called this vote to appeal to all parliamentarians who believe in science-led policy, not policy-led science, who truly want to turn this disease round and eradicate bovine TB. Yes, we need improvements to the testing regime, more transparency about herds that have TB breakdowns, more stringent evidence-led risk-based policy to manage cattle movements better, urgency from ministers to develop cost-effective badger vaccinations to tackle the disease in wildlife, and determined efforts to develop a vaccine to tackle TB in cattle. It's not too late to halt this cull. Work with farmers, wildlife group and others to put in place a strategy which will truly eradicate BTB. I urge members to join us tonight in the lobby.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think this has been an extremely useful debate, and not least because it's, I hope, reminded people that we are dealing with a devastating disease, a disease with devastating consequences, not just for animals, and by that I include cattle, but also wildlife, but also families and businesses across the country, and with an enormous impact on rural areas. And I think all the members on this side of the chamber mentioned that, but also creditably some on the other side as well, the Honourable Member Scunthorpe for North Tyneside, and the Honourable Lady for Rotherham, who'd clearly gone to the trouble to speak to farmers in her constituency, and I applaud that. And it's absolutely clear to me that we need a proper, comprehensive strategy to deal with this disease. And if there's one marked contrast in this debate, it is between the motion that is on the table from the opposition, simply saying no to one part of that strategy, and the government's amendment, which sets out a proper view of where we should be dealing with it. Can I deal with some of the misconceptions or perhaps disinformation that sometimes makes its way into debates of this kind? Because we had the Honourable Member for Swansea West, who I can't see in his place at the moment, in an intervention talked about genocide. Genocide of badgers. I think we had extermination from the Honourable Member for Derby North. Now, let's be absolutely clear. We are not talking about exterminating badgers. We are not talking about leaving this country without one of its iconic species across most of the countryside. In fact, there are very large parts of the countryside where badgers are healthy and cattle are healthy, and not a single thing will happen to badgers in those areas. We are talking about targeting this in areas where the badger has endemic disease and where we need to deal with it, and I think it is right and proper that we deal with it. We've had the suggestion that other countries have managed to deal with TB effectively without dealing with the wildlife reservoir of infection. That's simply not true. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, stated very clearly those countries which have dealt with TB effectively, and I'm afraid it is impossible to suggest a single country where TB has been dealt with, where there is a wildlife reservoir without dealing with it. And then we have this issue about vaccination. Let me scotch this myth about the research on vaccination, because it was mentioned by several people that somehow we had cut back on research into vaccination. It is simply not true. Let me give the figures. Since 1994 to 2010, £43 million spent on research in this area. That's 2.7 million approximately per annum. 2010 to 2014, £15.5 million over 4 years. That's £3.8 million per annum. And that is not including the £1 million that we have already spent on preparation for the field trials of the vaccine in this country for the purposes of the European Union, and the many millions of pounds that would be spent in conducting those trials. Then we have this nonsense about the fact that the government cancelled 6 of the vaccination trials. Now, let me be clear, those weren't vaccination trials. They were trials to see whether we could train lay people to vaccinate animals. And we don't need 6 experiments to see whether it's possible to train a lay person to vaccinate animals. You need 1 successful trial of that technique. What you do need is to engage with those people who want to use vaccination across the country to see where we can deploy it properly. That is where we have put resource. That is why I've been talking to my honourable friend Percy Ives about the proposals he has in Penwith. That's why we have worked with conservation groups in Gloucestershire and elsewhere, because we clearly believe that vaccination is part of the answer, is part of the comprehensive strategy, and we want to make sure that we're doing so effectively. But there is one significant problem with using vaccine, and the EFRA committee report very clearly lays out, which is the fact that we don't have a viable injectable vaccine at the moment which is cost-effective and sensible to use. We don't have an oral vaccine. We hope we will have in the very near future, and that's why we're putting research into that area, because that would make a big difference. And the one problem that cannot be escaped in terms of a vaccine is that a vaccine cannot cure a sick animal. And so a sick animal continues to excrete, continues to spread infection. So what you have to do is you have to remove the center of infection from the population, and then you protect the rest with badger vaccine. And I hope we will be able to do that. And I look at the trials in Wales, and the Honourable Lady Llanelli mentioned this with great approbation. Now, you know, I hope that those work. But I have to say, it is an experiment. We talk about non-evidence-based work. You know, let's see what she mentioned. Dr. Christian Glossop, the chief vet in Wales. What did she say? She said, we don't know whether vaccination will provide us with the appropriate way of dealing with the wildlife element of infection. And then she went on to say, there is no trial data to show that vaccinating badgers will make a difference on cattle herd breakdowns. So I really hope it works. I would love it to work. But I can't say that I know that it will work, because nobody knows that it will work. Now, let's deal with this issue about numbers. The Honourable Lady for Bristol East mentioned this, and so did the Honourable Lady for Wakefield, that we somehow don't know the badger numbers, and therefore the whole basis of the cull is a nonsense. Let me be very clear about the methodology. I really would have hoped that the Honourable Lady would have looked at the methodology before coming to the House on this issue, because we have the DNA hair test. That is a constant feedback loop on the proportion of the badger's population in an area that are being caught by the cull. So we will know definitively what proportion we are dealing with, and we can make adjustments accordingly. So there is not the slightest question of all of the badgers in the area being killed, or indeed that we take out far too few to be effective. We have the issue of humaneness. Now, I thought the Honourable gentleman for Pembrokeshire made the point absolutely better than I could, that the very organisations that were arguing for shooting as the most humane method of disposal are now saying it's the least humane. They cannot have it both ways. This is something which will be looked at as part of the trials. There will be observers watching how this takes place and reporting back, independent observers. That is the whole point of the trials, is to check on humaneness, on effectiveness, on safety. We're told that scientists have reached no consensus. That, again, is not true. On the science, there is consensus. We had a very, very valuable meeting at the Royal Society recently where there was clear scientific consensus on the validity of the evidence. What there isn't a consensus on is the political conclusions drawn from that evidence. And, you know, scientists are entitled to have a political view, but they're not entitled to mistake that for evidence. And that is the simple contention I would make. And then we have this issue about costs, and we're told that the costs are prohibitive simply because it is the belief of the opposition that people will behave illegally in those areas and will have to be policed. You could say that about anything. I can tell you that there are people shooting safely every night of the week across rural Britain, and it does not require large amounts of policing, and it does not require extra costs. So the only reason that there will be policing costs will be because people are determined to bring break the law and, in fact, put themselves and others in danger. I hope we can reach consensus, as the Honourable Member for Scunthorpe said, as the Honourable Member for Strangford and Brecon and Radnor has said, in a comprehensive strategy. No country has ever successfully borne down on TB without doing something about the reservoir infection in the wildlife population. I believe what we're putting forward is something that will achieve healthy cattle and healthy badgers. And our objective is very clear. We want to remove this devastating disease from this country, get back to the point where we have official TB-free status in this country. That will be good for the farmers, it will be good for the wildlife, it will be good for the taxpayer of this country, and I believe that it should commend itself to the House.
Has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Julie Hilling and Heidi Alexander. Tellers for the noes, Karen Brady and Mark Hunter.
The ayes to the right, 250. The noes to the left, 299.
The ayes to the right, 250. The noes to the left, 299. The noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the proposed words be there added. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Mark Hunter and Robert Sims. Tellers for the noes, Heidi Alexander and Julie Hilling. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 237.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 237. The ayes have it. Unlock. I declare the question as amended to be agreed. Yeah.